All right, R-rated reviews back. So after the wild and unbridled success of last week's video, I've hmm, wait a second, I'm getting a phone call. Hello? Yeah, that's me. And who's this? Hollywood? Yeah, sure I can. Oh, wow. Epstein's Island is still going. Look, that's really thoughtful, but keep the plane tickets. I actually make these just for the fun of it. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Bye. Well, it's weird. Anyways, as I was saying, I returned with another tier list, this time for the 17 fantasy books I read in 2019. To get to the top 10, we need to eat our vegetables first, so let's judge from trashy to classy. Kicking things off in the burnt fiddleheads category is Claw of the Conciliator, Shadow of the Torturer, and Blood Song. So let's move those up. There's Bloodsong, there's Claw of the Conciliator, and there is the Shadow of the Torturer in that order. Now, Shadow and Claw are the first two efforts in the Book of the New Sun series by Gene Wolfe. I looked forward to reading this series for a long time, and it actually took me quite a while to track these books down. Well, they're just plain awful books. I had no idea what was happening, and to be honest, I ended up skimming most of these books. They offended me that much. They came dangerously close to being do not finished. Fans of this series seem to defend it by claiming it needs multiple reads to be properly understood. While that may be true, why would I want to reread a book that's awful? That is a crazy tactic. The only good thing was that for some reason I was having wild, nonsensical dreams while reading that still managed to be more coherent than these books. And Blood Song was a book that started off fine for me. By the end of the book, I really, really didn't like it. Violently did not like it. The main idea, magic, special ability, whatever you want to call it, that was introduced felt like such a lame Deus Ex Machina cop out, and it really soured the book for me. This book basically ticked off every aspect on my generic fantasy trope checklist, but everything offered has just been done better somewhere else. I've also read that the rest of this series is a bit of a mess. So, just like dating a Kardashian, I strongly advise you to avoid this whole family. Now, moving up into the cold slaw category, which is fine, not offensive at all. I have four books in this category. I enjoyed them, just not very memorable. First is the Prince of Thorns and King of Thorns books, written by Mark Lawrence. So we got King of Thorns and Prince of Thorns. Prince of Thorns is the first book in the series. King of Thorns is the second. And if you used your brain, you could probably guess what the title of the third one is. Now, I like the way he writes, and I'm definitely going to read more of his books. But I also expect I'll enjoy his other books more than I did these two. Again, there wasn't anything inherently wrong with them. They were just not that memorable, mildly enjoyable fantasy. Next, I have The Golden Compass, which was a fun read as well. The Golden Compass, old classic, also in the coleslaw category. I know there's a lot of conversation about the messages behind this book, but for me, the religious drama did not affect my enjoyment. It was a neat book that I think I would have enjoyed more if I had discovered it when I was younger. And you also cannot dispute the coolness of armored polar bear fights. Next on my list, I have A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, which also has some controversy. Let's move that up here. Yeah, this book also had some controversy as the butthurt Game of Thrones fans would gladly lock George R. R. Martin in a dark basement with no food and water with Nickelback blasting through the speakers and not let him out until he finishes A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't really care. I don't mind waiting. There's so much other stuff to read. And with that being said, this is a nice, enjoyable book and addition to his world. I recommend it. Now, let's move into the top 10. which is really what this whole video is about. So, starting off in the live octopus category, this is for books that are probably good, but just didn't really jive with me. At number 10 is Perdido Street Station by China Mayville. Let's move him up here. I had very strong reactions to this book, both ways. This book was like Christianity all over again, as it bludgeoned me over the head with the triforce of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or in this case, the dirtiness, the lexicon, and the holy cable. I think the first 100 pages of this book were just describing how dirty the city was. I get it. It's dirty. It's really, really dirty. At the same time, he's slinging around 87-point Scrabble words. Saying he's loquacious would be like saying Michael Jordan can play basketball. Honestly, his vocabulary alienated me a bit. And the third strike was when the second half of this book became the cable guy. I was waiting for Jim Carrey to show up. It seriously is an amazing feat how he drags out this idea of connecting a cable for nearly 200 pages. It feels like an obscene trolling job. So why is it top 10? Because it's a wild trip. There are cactus men, badass bird men, sexual acts with insects, and a pretty wild villain. The world is interesting, bizarre, believable. Unfortunately, for me, this book felt more like a showcase for Mayville's considerable talent rather than a coherent or pointed story. Next, we have number 9, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This is also going into the live octopus category. Interesting because The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson is the first book in his Stormlight Archives series, which is wildly popular and successful and highly regarded. But look, I enjoyed this book and the world it's building, but I also felt like it could have been about 500 pages shorter. I think this book is like 1,300 pages. And in the same way, I'm not sure a movie ever needs to be 3.5 hours long. I'm looking at you, Irishman. I don't love books over 1,000 pages. It just feels indulgent. I think The Stand is the only book I've read that length that felt justified. That being said, if you're one of those X-Men whose special ability is reading a book every day, then you may as well read this honker, as it is a decent yarn. I've actually reviewed 2 books of this series, the first and the second, and the second one is on this channel if you want to hear more of my conflicted views about Brandon Sanderson. Number 8, sliding up to the solid but unspectacular mashed potatoes category, is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is a modern retelling of a bit of Greek mythology. Now, I was obsessed with Greek myths when I was young, so I eat this stuff up. I did, however, find the story to be a bit boring and slow at times. The real reason that Circe is number 8 is because Madeline Miller's prose is so gorgeous. I think I wrote down 10 or 15 quotes from this book while reading that absolutely floored me. And I would actually say that this book is a must-read, even if you're not interested in the subject material, just because of how well she writes. At number 7, I have The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, a book that won a bunch of awards. It is the first book of her Broken Earth trilogy. It's a really great book, wildly creative and original and interesting. It begins with the gambit of basically telling you the world has ended, and it's inferred that these books will explain how that end occurred. It's an interesting tactic. I don't want to spoil this one too much, as it's really fun to discover her world on your own. The only major issue I had with this book was that parts were written in the second person perspective, and those parts were jarring and unfortunately didn't work at all. But that's okay. I mean, we all make mistakes. Shout out to any of my ex-girlfriends who are listening and nodding along vigorously. Number 6 is Nevernight by J. Kristoff. Move that over here. Okay. This book is so much fun. I highly recommend it. It's another book I've reviewed on this channel already, so I'll keep it brief. Female protagonist, special abilities, dark and gritty, some romance, a school competition for the gifted. Yes, these are all tired tropes, but it still managed to feel exciting and interesting while reading. Again, as is the theme with this tier, there's a major flaw for me. And for this book, the major flaw was footnotes. During the first part, there are crazy footnotes, like half page long footnotes on almost every page. It felt like a cheap shtick for info dumping and was incredibly distracting while reading. But other than that, I highly recommend it. At number 5, I have A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. Mm-hmm. I actually read this book when I was probably around 10 years old and loved it so much that I decided to reread it. Now, I hardly ever reread books because there's just so many good books to read out there. And to be honest, I was a little bit less impressed with it the second time, but it is a great little book. It's mystical and vague and languorous. Not much happens here, but Earthsea is a truly magical and worthwhile fantasy world that Le Guin would return to multiple times, and it all begins here. This kind of, for a long time, felt like the bridge between Tolkien's Middle Earth and then Harry Potter's world. And that long gap in between, many people tried to sort of redo what Tolkien did, and I felt like Le Guin's Earthsea was probably the closest that anybody came. She offers some really thoughtful world building here, a unique take on magic, and Jed or Ged, I'm not even sure how to say his name, one of the most memorable wizards in fantasy, in my opinion. At number 4, the last scoop of mashed potatoes is Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. I think I've actually got a detailed review of this book coming out shortly. So this is the first book in the Books of Babel series that I'm very much looking forward to continuing soon. Senlin is our protagonist. He's a school teacher and a self-described puffed up nobody, but he evolves throughout this book because of his situation and his environment, and it's really delightful to watch his transformation. Also refreshing is his normal guy persona. It makes how he deals with problems seem grounded and relatable, despite being surrounded by fantastical elements. I would say the other star of this story is the tower itself, although I'll let the reader discover its unique mysteries for themselves, as that's half the fun of this charming entry. So, why is it in the mashed potatoes category? Well, at times the book can feel a little bit slow. There's not a whole lot that happens, but really it's just a minor gripe in what is otherwise a very, very fun fantasy book. Okay, top 3 time. These were books that not only did I enjoy immensely, but also had no discernible or glaring flaw for me to pick at, which is why they are going in the lovely, mouth-watering Southern barbecue category. So, at number 3 is City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett, the first book in Bennett's The Divine Cities series. This is another series I cannot wait to continue. The book is almost like a supernatural detective story, and I think Bennett did such a great job melding the thriller genre with fantasy elements. While it starts off quite a bit confusing, the payoff at the end of the book, when things finally start to all fit together, is simply superb and so rewarding, and sets up the rest of the series remarkably well. Also, the supporting character of Sigurd is just balls to the wall fun. This is There is actually a part of this book featuring Sigurd that could literally be its own Hollywood action movie. It's that good. There is some really fascinating world building in this book, and Bennett seems to be a name that you should really follow as he's a young and up and coming author, and he's written a few other highly regarded books as well. At number 2 is the second book of N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth series, The Obelisk Gate. For me, this was just a continuation of the fascinating originality of the first book. Now, I did enjoy it more than the first for a couple of reasons. First, the second person perspective is still here and it still sucks, but I guess that I just got used to it because it didn't grate on me nearly as much this time around. And second, I was just more invested in the world she's built, so the book connected with me more. All I can really say is that I remember really, really enjoying this book and racing to the finish, and I'd highly recommend it to anyone who wants to experience a totally unique world, which is something that's very rare in fantasy. Also, if you're into books written by women, books written by minorities, books with thinly veiled racial allegories, you can tick all those boxes here. I don't personally care about that stuff at all. I mean, if Jeffrey Weinstein wrote The Lord of the Rings, it would still be my favorite series ever, but to each their own. And then finally, number one on my list is The Tombs of Atuan by Ursula K. Le Guin. This, of course, is the second book in the Earth Sea cycle, and it's just a magical book for me. It's another reread. I've been rereading this whole series. And some people say that this book was actually the beginning of strong female protagonists. Okay, cool. Not why I liked it. For me, the reason why this book hits me so hard is that it showcases Le Guin's ability to take a fantasy story ostensibly about a dark priestess growing up in a magical land and make it so incredibly human. How are we shaped by our surroundings? At what point do we stop doing what we're told and start making decisions for ourselves? And what are the consequences of those decisions? It's a stunningly evocative story that doesn't give any easy answers or cater to a generic happy ending. The world she lets us visit feels so vast and believable as the Earthsea stories continue to shade in small parts of her world. It's this vignette quality that makes each visit to Earthsea so anticipated and so exciting as you feel each time you're getting one more small piece of the puzzle. If you haven't read the Earthsea cycle, obviously I highly recommend it. And really, I recommend nearly all of Le Guin's work, as she's written some of my favorite science fiction as well. Okay, so there you have it. That is my top 10 fantasy books that I read in 2019. Hope you liked it. And if you disagree with any of my observations, let me have it in the comments. I can take it. Maybe next week I'll dive into all the fiction I read in 2019. But for now, see you next time on Rants and Reviews.